The first lady of action figure females is without a doubt Princess Leia. Maybe not the first female action figure, but the most important, as she alone paved the way for all her girlfriends to follow. I'm Victor, and straight out of the Gen experience, Princess Leia Organa's legacy secured the rise of other female action figures in future franchises. Coined by the 1960s and 70s G.I. Joe, action figures are based on boys' play patterns, and during the male-dominated field of 80s action figures, there would be room for some ladies, just out of proportion to the number of males, and some just out of proportion. How did these action figure females fare? You're about to find out. You're going to love this, so please click the like and press subscribe to show me a little support for the Gen experience. I bet, like me, you remember a few more bun-toting female characters in the Star Wars franchise, but you wouldn't know they existed by looking at the card back and cross-sell for the original Star Wars trilogy figures. Leia had like a dozen different looks, and many of those versions were created and sold, so I give Kenner some credit. But by the end of Return of the Jedi, no other females were produced. It wasn't that they were going to dethrone their queen, or princess in this case, but she was the main character. She was, and would, sell. Kenner was not about to take a risk with far less popular or background females to produce for little to no return in an action figure line where boys may not care to acquire other potential female figures. They were going to wait a couple of decades before every single background human, alien, or droid, male or female alike, would be produced. For now, Princess Leia was queen, and even boys were certain to add her to their collection and include her in their play. Let's see how other female figures did as they entered the fray. Star Trek, the motion picture, is groundbreaking in 1979, and a decent initial set of 6 action figures were produced. Due to the film's story, it would be hard to ignore the main character of Ilia. Sadly, with only 6 figures and having 2 new characters in the lineup, the rest of the original crew were grounded. And having 2 female action figures was risking a lot, so the classic staple, Uhura, assuredly got the go-go boot for this one-time Starfleet officer. Ilia's buck or mold fits right in line with the others, even if it contains no shared parts from the male figures. Most of the changes are subtle, besides the obvious bald head, chest difference, and the ever so slight tapering at the waist. Not nearly enough tapering to mirror the actress that portrayed her on screen. By 1980, 6 more figures were released, but they were all alien and villains, as Mego didn't even attempt to finish off the original crew. But including Ilia was throwing a bone to the female leads and to Trekkies everywhere. Continuing our trend of live-action women on screen, represented in 100% injected molded plastic, Mego's Buck Rogers line was based off the theatrical movie that would become the weekly episodic adventures. Surprise! This toy line came out of the gate with 9 figures altogether, even Draco, who had like 1 minute of screen time. Trying to outdo both Star Wars and Star Trek, the line dropped both Colonel Wilma Deering, portrayed by Erin Gray, and Princess Ardala, a villain performed by Pamela Hensley, a couple of gorgeous space ladies designed for the wandering eye of young people coming of age. Wilma's hair was done well, as it was styled appropriately in a bun, which worked for an action figure, and was also seen that way in the film. As for Ardala, I always assumed the figure showed her with straight blonde hair instead of her flowing brunette locks. Turns out, those are just the gold strands from her horned headdress. At 3 3/4 inch, like many other action figures, Mego sprung for the O-ring design that would be made famous with G.I. Joe. 2 female action figures seemed to make the Buck Rogers toy line ahead of its time. There was even a prototype for Hawkgirl, made for the planned Wave 2 before the line was canceled. I guess even in the 25th century, we've got a ways to go. Winding up the big budget-based toy lines, the Black Hole 1979 bet big on merchandising. This was a hot trend at the time, but with varying degrees of success. Once again, using the O-ring design like Buck Rogers, the Black Hole Toys released a whopping 11 action figures in their line, including Dr. Kate McRae, played on screen by Yvette Mimieux. Like her earliest film, Where the Boys Are, there was no shortage of males, as they produced every single character from that film, so skipping out on Kate would be all too conspicuous. Here we see again, as we've seen before, action figures, not just females, lacking any real face detail, unless it was facial hair. Although the Buck Rogers card art promised some paint detail, ultimately Wilma, Ardala, and now Kate and the crew all possessed the same hollow, soulless eyes. You can't tell me it was because they were 3 3/4 inch figures. Even Star Trek's figures had some detail. Not only would action figures get smaller, but Princess Leia was actually popularized at that same size, and she had what so many lacked: pupils. These toys had faces like a blank canvas. G.I. Joe had been off the shelf since the mid-70s, but this next toy line goes all the way from 12 inches down to just over 2. Eagle Force debuted their diverse international military line of freedom fighters and terrorists in 1982 to fill that gap. This would start a trend of toys not inspired by movie releases. Debuting with a bevy of crazy named characters, Eagle Force had their one and only female soldier, Goldie Hawk. Holy! You could serve a drink on that ass! Goldie's design suffers from what I believe is no women allowed on the Boys Toys team. Her profile, with so much junk in the trunk, is over-exaggerated to say the least. But forward view, her face mold isn't jacked up too much, although you can't ignore her Joan Crawford-like shoulders, lending a burly brick house of a torso and perky breasts. When they say chest out, they mean it. Then there's the neck. Here, the slightly overweight General Mamba, who almost sports the neck of a swan, while Goldie seems to be suffering from a goiter. These things were out by 1983, perhaps having gone just a little too small. But Hasbro had to have seen the writing on the wall, as nobody missed Eagle Force while the new G.I. Joes were marching in. It was time for big change, and we mean big muscles and big oversized figures at 5.5 inches. This would become common for other toy lines as well, but the 3 3/4 would not go extinct. Size variations would become normal upon the arrival of Masters of the Universe, or MOTU, in 1982. The toys were first and doing well, but the Filmation cartoon to help market the line blasted this franchise into the stratosphere. Stratos, get it? Although Teela and Evelyn were part of the line before the animated series, the cartoons cemented their place in the lore, and they wouldn't be ignored, not even from little boys. Whatever they thought about having a girl action figure was thrown out the window, as having Teela and Evelyn was a must, a badge of honor. Now, we called them Thunder Thighs, or at least my older brothers did. It is true they had some legs, but they were in a line full of juiced up heroes, so they had to fit in. Teela was prominent with her perfect 80s tan and that awesome snake armor, as her figure was meant to represent 2 female figures in one. Much cheaper and low risk than selling a second female for the heroic warriors, the goddess. As for Evelyn, a recolor of Teela, she did have a unique head mold along with her jaundiced yellow skin, because she's a witch. Or wait, was that an evil warrior goddess? Either way, her makeup was even more over the top than Divine or any other drag queen for that matter, made her all the more sought after as a member of the baddies. Fortunately, there was no scrimping on the face details. Paint application was appropriate and no one was left with Ghostface. The line only added one more female. The show had created the differentiation of the goddess and developed the sorceress, so she was released late in the series. With arms that could only go up out to her sides along with her wings, she was a little late to the party and is often forgotten. To save on the skyrocketing price of petroleum, G.I. Joe was shrunk to 3 3/4 inch, but they came back in a blaze of glory, with old glory. This special mission force of diverse characters fighting Cobra's terrorist organization filled the hole left by Eagle Force in 1982 without missing a beat. Slipping onto the toy shelves with the articulation-friendly O-ring design, they also succeeded when it came to the details and molds of their action figures. Well, at least the male action figures. Was this another example of no women allowed on the Boys Toys team for Hasbro? G.I. Joe did well with their male action heroes, but when it came to the women, the O-ring design was helpful, but the molds of the first females' heads and faces begged the question, had these nerds ever seen a woman? Scarlet is famed for being first, and although she is obviously designed in print, animation, and possibly on box art as having her famous red ponytail, the figure just cuts it off in favor of head articulation back and forth. Not even the Wilma Deering updo. This is disappointing for sure, and it shows on Scarlet's face. For us who saw the cartoon, we were often perplexed by such a difference in appearance. Luckily, Cobra made up for it with their appropriately raven-locked Baroness action figure in 1984. They allowed for her hair and sacrificed head motion, and the world was better for it. It worked for me. The Baroness was one of the best-looking female toys out there. Wouldn't you agree? Best representation, and her black outfit screamed bad girl in every sense of the word. And the cartoon played this up. After such a success with the Baroness, CoverGirl arrives on the scene, a female driver accompanying the Wolverine tank vehicle. Clever, Hasbro. Get another female action figure in boys' hot little hands by packaging her in with an awesome tank. As it turns out, this might have been the only way anyone was going to buy her. The character on TV is a mature, attractive, auburn-headed ex-model. The toy? a heavy-browed, sullen-looking grunt with an oversized noggin. She didn't even come with a weapon. Lame. But then there was Lady Jaye. What can we say? The breast molds, although not quite matching the promise of the perk on the card art, did give her extra broad shoulders. But where Scarlet and CoverGirl looked miserable, Lady Jaye at least looked excited to meet ya, and even gave off that tomboy image that many of us imagined for her and was played up a bit in the animation. The Real American Heroes line also proved that, no matter the scale, some minor face detail goes a long way. Eyes, eyebrows, and lips are just a little detail that can elevate you above the rest. G.I. Joe was firing on all cylinders during those early days. Not 1, 2, 3, but 5 female characters within their first golden years. However, Zarana, the Dreadnought and twin sister to Xandar and younger sibling to the skin-changing master of disguise Zartan, had such an atrocious look out of the gate, she was given emergency cosmetic surgery. However, to this day, I am not sure which one is better or which resembles our animated counterpart more faithfully. Do you? Which do you prefer, if either? Her and her brother were the embodiment of the 1980s punk movement. They were the outliers. Their style of dress was shocking, along with their faces, and were a far cry from the other figures' looks. Xandar's mold seemed to go unscathed, but Zarana's head sculpt and mohawk, which seems suspiciously fastened to the top of her head, will go down as one of the worst. But how can you fault G.I. Joe? During the golden era of A Real American Hero, they didn't shy away from female action figures, and since most were badasses, they were breaking down the barriers of boys' toys and getting these gals in their grubby hands. But when it came to an all-girls line, that was a little different. It was the golden age of action figures, the golden age of toy lines, and toy lines accompanied by animated marketing. So why not feature an entire line of female action figures with Golden Girl in 1984? Like GoBots to Transformers, Golden Girl debuted first, but finished last in the race against She-Ra, Princess of Power. I've done an entire show on the channel about the promise of box art and the occasional letdown when you get the prize inside. And Golden Girl fits the bill. Unlike Barbie, who is a fashion doll based on traditional girls' play patterns of living daily life and seeing themselves through the doll, Golden Girl and other action figures are based on living fantasy adventures through the toy, where the importance is put more on the accessories, action features, and even playsets in a storyline of clear good versus evil, instead of clothes and hairplay. Golden Girl may have had the hairplay, but this was an epic adventure of the Guardians of the Gemstone. Although without any accompanying media, what the Gemstone was all about, I couldn't tell you. The dolls were rather basic and too youthful in appearance, but the Dragon Queen, Voltura, Moth Lady, and Wild One of the Forces of Evil had some exaggerated and over-the-top Kiss-like makeup design choices that made them stand out. Unlike other toy lines I've covered here, there were only 2 male figures made, Prince Chroma of the good guys and Ogra for the bad. She-Ra, on the other hand, twin sister to He-Man, was all action figure, even if they each came with a comb to style their rooted hair. The look of the Princess of Power had to complement Masters of the Universe designs to be played together. Pink box or not, millions of boys wanted the characters showcased in She-Ra's cartoon to have along with their ranks of heroic and evil warriors of He-Man and Skeletor. She-Ra debuted in 1984 while her cartoon premiered in 85. There was a softer look to her over Golden Girl. The line of female warriors was all very feminine, but still worked as a complement to Motu, especially with their own animated series with the exact same look and feel, strengthening the connection between the two lines and crossed over some of the figures between the two. She-Ra and He-Man existed in the same universe, but She-Ra sold in the girls' toy aisles, where only brave boys ventured to lead their mothers to pick up a pop action figure of their own, hoping to escape any ridicule. I know, I was one. What can you say? They made sure to release their biggest superheroine from the get-go, and Wonder Woman of the DC Superpowers line from 1984 is not only feminine, but easily recognizable. The Super Friends and the live-action Wonder Woman TV show starring Linda Carter were no longer on the air, but those ever-present images and the continuing comics made our favorite Amazon not only always familiar, but a must-have in any toy box. This was an action figure through and through, with some definite detail, if not a little awkward in the Spanx department. What she lacked in crotch design was made up for in her gimmick. Press her legs together and bracelet defense actions initiated. This was one hell of an action figure, and like the rest of her male heroes, she was always on equal footing. When I saw LJN's original Thundercats collection, I thought they were more infantile than the other lines that I loved. They seemed chunky, clunky, but that didn't stop anyone from getting them and adding them to their action figure arsenal. Luckily, they didn't diss their fan favorite feline, Chitara. Well, I mean, they included her. However, her look has a lot to be desired. One of the biggest crimes against a character I'd ever seen. She wasn't a big brick like her male counterparts, she was slight. But when you're used to seeing this, it's difficult to connect the two and believe they represent the same awesome speedster we knew and loved. Also, they were cheaping out on us by not giving her leg articulation. She's a cat, for God's sakes. How's she gonna land on her feet when falling off the top shelf in your room? Sure, she is similar to her character's namesake, but still far enough removed to not give her a pass. We all know Mask, not that one. No, or that one. Mask, the Kenner toy line of 2.5-inch action figures of a specialized team like G.I. Joe, who all came with rad vehicles with alternate modes, like Transformers. The best of both worlds and very unique. Mask debuted in 1985 and had a cartoon to help push sales. Mask is unfortunately the only toy line that shafts the females from the get-go. Both Gloria Baker and Vanessa Warfield appear in almost all 65 Season 1 episodes, and yet it is Vanessa in her Porsche, the Manta, who finally got a toy in the second wave of vehicles. Her car was damn cool. Even her voice,
I'm just dying for a big old ice cream cone. You know where I could find one?
was more like Diane Wiest at the end of the Birdcage.
There's always a first time.
But poor Gloria, the female on the good guy side with her submersible shark. She did not get a vehicle or figure during the first season of the show or the 2 series of toys for that season. Then, appearing only once in the first episode of the second season, she still didn't get a toy doppelganger. Finally, in an odd twist of fate, Gloria appears in the 4th series of the toy line when no accompanying media existed. Driving a race car named after a mask power of one of the other bad guys, her own mask does nothing but creates a duplicate image of herself to drive her alternate vehicle. And she wasn't even in the same colors, except her helmet, which totally clashes. They did her wrong. Look closely. Yes, both of these women do sport a kind of shag mullet. Although Kenner did permit the longer hair on both figures that worked even with the neck articulation, the translation from animation to figure was less mullet and more shoulder-length shag mess. Besides the touch of red lipstick on our Venom femme fatale, they both are pale faces with 0 to no paint detail. Although if you look hard enough, you'll see what a number of lines did provide. Tiny molded details in lines, just not very attractive ones. Fortunately for us, although even smaller than Star Wars or G.I. Joe, they did get bendy knees to sit down in their own vehicles more easily. The masks themselves were great too, before you lost those little suckers or a younger sibling swallowed them whole. In a perpetual squat with eyes that look like she's been hit upside the head by Casey Jones's bat, the original April O'Neil is a favorite. Not at all due to her oversized breasts popping out of that jumpsuit. It is 1988, and would Princess Leia be thrilled at her legacy? Leia was finally off the shelves, and April has gone on to live in pop culture and not be forgotten, like so many others. Action figures were changing, and although she is the 5.5-inch figure with only 5 points of articulation, new character designs were all over the place, random with everything from size to sculpt. But this was after my original playtime had ended, and although I did keep up with what was new in cartoons and on the toy aisle, April and the Turtles, as well as Janine from the real Ghostbusters, were more like afterthoughts to me. Poor Janine with her various inconsistent molds, not to mention strange figures, like the one that included the Tickler ghost. Tickler? Really? Or the one where, looking at her face, I'm afraid to ask what her action feature is for fear of hearing blow up doll Janine. These were for millennials, the new kids. They were starting to rear their ugly heads into our territory at the end of the 80s, and the toy landscape was becoming theirs. Some things would stay the same, but lots more would change with that generation. I was thrilled with what came before, what Princess Leia and even her predecessors, the Fisher-Price Adventure people, had laid the groundwork for. But the future belonged to a brand new set of brats, and apparently the Power Rangers. If this is what the first female Power Ranger figures look like, then there was bound to be some growing pains. The pink and yellow Rangers were being hijacked for boys' toys. Unless you flipped their heads, the kids were just playing with 5 male action figures, which was certainly not what they saw on the TV show. Although there weren't a lot of females to memorialize in plastic in my youth, those that were stood out as proud members of the team. That was only a handful of lines that were allowed to go co-ed. There were plenty of others that missed out on the opportunity. The 4-piece Clash of the Titans line didn't even release an Andromeda or Medusa. The Battlestar Galactica toy line without Athena, Cassiopeia, Sheba, or Serena, but instead the pig-headed beret. Tragic. Tron's 4-piece set without Yori. Criminal. Even the Transformers, who in 1986 debuted their most famous fembot RC, at least tried with a prototype. Whew, that's one for the vaults. Its cancellation was, as you can guess,
it was a mercy killing.
No matter the scale or if their appearance differed greatly from what we knew, we boys were thrilled to get these leading ladies into our troops and to complete our toy line during the Collect Them All generation. Enjoy these last photos of those same characters and action figures that we've seen in the show, made with today's TLC and modern action figure technology. And then you can say, you've come a long way, baby. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this trip through the past. How many of these women did you own in their plastic plaything form? Let's discuss them in the comments. And if you haven't clicked the like or subscribe, I'm hoping you do that before you go and check out more of the great content on this channel. Discover more from the greatest generation, the Gen Experience. Until next time.